The Edison 365 podcast explores the best practices and deep insights of modern-day Edisons, people who innovate 365 days of the year. This podcast is brought to you by Edison 365, the company that enables idea management from idea to business impact. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Edison 365 podcast. My name is Stuart Noyce, and I am joined today by my partner, Dennis Hull. Our guest is Jeffrey Phillips, Director of Strategy and Innovation at RTI Innovation Advisors. Jeffrey, thank you very much for taking this interview with us today.
Glad to do it.
Yeah, so let's get started by just maybe you could help us understand what you do at RTI Innovation Advisors and how you came to be working there.
Sure. RTI Innovation Advisors is a team of about 50 people that works with both commercial entities and also government agencies and a few not-for-profits. And our task primarily is to introduce innovation capacity building, so help them stand up innovation teams, to help them accelerate their innovation activities. We do a lot of customer and market research. We do some technology scouting. And we also do a lot of work around helping organizations bring their best ideas to market more quickly. And we are beginning to do some work around the intersection of digital transformation and innovation. The Innovation Advisors team is a smaller team within larger RTI. Just for context, RTI was the original tenant in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, and it's a large nonprofit private research institute. As far as my background is concerned, I came to RTI Innovation Advisors about a year and a half ago. Prior to that, I led another innovation team called OVO Innovation for about 15 years. And at OVO and here had the same sort of responsibilities, leading strategic front-end work, primarily for commercial companies trying to either build an innovation capability, improve their innovation capability, or who just needed help running through an innovation project to create a new product or service.
Okay, so can you take us through the big problem that you address at RTI?
The big problem we address with our customers?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about it from the point of view of your clients, they come to you and they obviously need some help because they're coming to you as a consultant. So what is their challenge and what is it that you're addressing for them?
Well, one of the things that we like to do is talk about innovation as a journey. And so I need to answer your question in multiple parts. Some clients will come to us at the very beginning of an innovation journey saying, we're not quite sure where to go, where our innovation journey may take us, what kinds of products and services even our customers may need. So we may do things like helping define an innovation strategy for that client and giving them direction on where we believe the best emerging opportunities lie. We can do that through some trend spotting and foresighting and some scenario planning. In other instances, we may meet a customer somewhere in the journey where they may have begun an innovation process, but they may not have good insight into actual customer needs. So we'll do a lot of market research, ethnography, and voice of the customer research to help them really uncover needs that they can address or to help them find technologies that may complete a product or service. So that's more like tech scouting. Go out and find technologies or partners to help build a complete solution. We may meet a customer further down the innovation journey who have done some work and created a viable technology or product, but have difficulty getting it to market. So in that case, we can look at innovation and an IP portfolio, help them evaluate which ideas and technologies have the most promise in the marketplace, and even develop through our innovation ecosystem of partners, find the right partner, the right joint venture, the right licensing opportunity to get that product into the marketplace. So as I've said, innovation is a journey, and we can sort of meet customers and solve problems for customers anywhere along that journey.
Excellent. So what's a typical engagement that you might have with a client? And are these clients relatively large?
I would say the majority of our customers, probably 50 to 60% of our customers are Fortune 500, Fortune 5000 size companies in a number of different industries. And then probably another 30 to 40% of our customers are large government, primarily U.S. federal government agencies. And then we do have a number of large nonprofit or not-for-profit foundations that are also our customers. Typically, a project will look like something along the lines of a customer will present a need or an opportunity or a problem that they're facing, and then we begin to scope it for them and with them so we understand, back to the journey metaphor, where they are in the journey, what steps they've already taken or need to take, and begin to define how we might add value to that innovation, either journey or building out of their innovation capacity. So we can do things like lead a project end to end. We can help them stand up their capability and coach them through the process, and also deliver some innovation training as appropriate.
Great. So what makes RTI so special? Why are people coming to you as opposed to some other consultants?
Well, I think we talk about a number of different differentiators, but there are probably 3 or 4 that I would want to think about. We tend to do what I would consider to be the sort of soup to nuts model of innovation, meaning that we can help them frame up their strategic capability and build out an innovation capacity, define a team, define a process, and run an innovation activity or sets of innovation activities against that defined innovation model. So we can look at things like, how is your team structured? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right governance? Do you have the right innovation culture? So there's a very almost an atmospheric side of that equation. Do you have the right innovation environment? The second thing we do a lot of is that research, whether it's customer market or technology research. And we benefit in that from 2 things. One, RTI and Innovation Advisors is over 50 years old, and our team actually got its start doing technology commercialization for NASA just before the Apollo program. So we've been doing technology commercialization and tapping into these innovation ecosystems for close to 50 years. And what that means is we don't just talk about the technology, we have a lot of technology available to us, both in our team and in the larger RTI organization. It's not well known, but RTI has one of the largest numbers of PhDs per capita for an organization of its size in the US. So we have a lot of embedded technical skill within the organization. So we really differentiate around our ability to innovate, especially where technologies are concerned. And I talked a little bit about tapping into the ecosystem. Because we've done so much technology commercialization work, and we've worked with universities and research agencies and government entities and other corporations, we're very tied into and very trusted in the ecosystem. That means that we can find new technologies quickly, we can partner with third parties pretty quickly to bring good ideas to market more rapidly.
Wow, that's great. So the company's been around for quite a while, 50 years, you said. What is there one particular achievement along the way that you would say was particularly amazing? That or are there number of achievements, or what would you say has been that thing that's been really special?
Well, I haven't been here all 50 years, but I would say that actually some of the early work that the organization did with NASA was really interesting because, as you may know, the federal law requires that if an organization like NASA or a national lab creates new technologies, they're required to find commercial uses or purposes for them. And so that's actually where our team got its start, is finding innovative new uses for technology spinning out of NASA. So that was the foundation. But over time, we've done a tremendous number of innovation activities. For example, for one commercial client, we've done over 350 projects over the period of years, helping them understand new technologies and how they fit into their product offerings, looking at new markets and the viability and availability of those markets. We also work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You may be familiar with some of the clean sanitation work that they're doing. We're actually managing a rather large portion of what's known as the STEP program, which is to bring clean water and clean sanitation to underprivileged, basically third world environments. So a lot of the work that we do is really about bettering the human condition as well. We obviously have a focus on driving revenue and profit, but we also, because we're part of a nonprofit research institute, we have a large mission-driven mentality as well.
Well, that's excellent. So what's coming up for RTI in the next 12 months? Are there specific objectives that you're driving towards?
Yeah, I think the new thing, and it's not new, but the new thing for us that we're really getting engaged in is this idea of the intersection of the digital transformation that's occurring, and your audience will probably understand that, but all of the artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics. And on one hand, and we believe that what's happening is that is going to coincide and intersect with innovation. And when those two things intersect, it creates a really interesting opportunity, because what we believe it means is that a lot of products that you could call dumb products today, take, for example, a drinking glass or a pencil sharpener, eventually it would be likely that a lot of these products are smarter, that they're smart and connected to the internet through a set of sensors based on the Internet of Things capability. And when that happens, it opens up this new vista of new innovation, because those smart products are generating data, and that data generates value, and it may change a customer experience or a revenue model. It may be that I can provide products to customers at very little or no cost, but harvest value from their data or their usage, as an example. So we think there's a really interesting opportunity that's about to emerge, given the intersection between these digital transformation tools, all the data that's going to be generated out of that, and the way we're going to innovate new products and services. And that's an area that we're spending a lot of time focusing on and working with customers on as well.
Well, it's really, really interesting, and hopefully we get a little bit more chance to talk about that later in this podcast. Thank you for going through that initial set of questions with me, Jeffrey, because we are very interested in what's not just you, but what's going on at RTI Innovation Advisors. But now I'm going to turn the mic over to Dennis Hull, and he's going to ask you more questions, and we're really going to have a time where we can learn a little bit more about you and about your approach to innovation.
Thank you, Stuart. So, Jeffrey, in your work as an innovation consultant and taking clients through their innovation journey, you said you've done a series of scenario planning exercises. Now, I recently graduated from Holt International Business School, and we're taught, amongst other things, that scenario planning can be a very powerful tool. However, we often ended up with very utopian or very dystopian scenarios. How do you find these scenario planning exercises with your clients?
Yeah, I do think that there is like any tool, these tools can be misused or they can be abused. What we try to do with our clients is understand what I think of as emerging futures, which then will indicate emerging opportunities, emerging threats, and emerging customers. Because too many companies think of the world as being relatively static. The customers and markets and competitors they have today will be similar to the ones they will have in the future. To put that into perspective, I did some work for the U.S. Navy several years ago where we looked at the future of combat ships. And the interesting thing about the Navy is they have a 30 to 50 year life for their ships. And they need to consider, as they're building a new ship, not just what uses or enemies or combatants that they would face today, but they need that ship to be able to react and respond to future conditions. So one of the things that you have to do is think about what is necessary for the near future, but also given over the competitive landscape of the timeline of the product or service, what kinds of things is it likely to encounter? And then more grandly for the business itself, what kinds of scenarios? So your question really dealt with the dystopian scenarios. I think that a lot of us are used to sort of science fiction thinking about, well, what happens if all these factors turn negative or all these factors turn in a specific direction? Do we get into this sort of a very narrow canyon of the future where everything is negative. What we try to ask, are you looking across the right set of criteria? So we typically look across political criteria, economic criteria, societal criteria like demographics, and technological. And if you appropriately balance the inputs you're getting across at least those four inputs, and some people will use other methodologies, that's called the PEST methodology, political, economic, societal, and technological. If you look across those and you balance your inputs effectively and you forecast, then you can use a very negative slant to your forecast or a very positive slant. But generally speaking, what we try to do is create multiple scenarios. And what you're looking for is that the realization that none of those scenarios is necessarily perfectly likely to happen. But what we often look for are the recurring themes and threads across scenarios. So instead of looking at one really negative or one really positive, what we try to do is create several that represent different outcomes and then begin to look for common themes and threads across them. And those are the things that we believe are more likely and more indicative of what might happen.
Exactly. So when you've identified actionable opportunities and strategies with your clients, how do you proceed to create momentum and maintaining agility in the work ahead?
Well, the interesting thing for a lot of organizations is, at least in my experience, a lot of them don't do a lot of foresighting or scenario planning. And often when they're confronted with a potential future or a set of potential futures, they're not really sure how to engage it because there's a number of cultural inhibitions around making change. Most organizations are built to sustain the existing business model and the existing way of thinking. Less so are they organized to think about where the future is. So one of the first things we have to do oftentimes is to get people to buy into the possibility of that future that we've defined, and then begin to ask questions. Now, if that future were to occur, what things would we need to do in the next 6 to 12 months to address that future? What are things we need to do in the next 12 to 18 months to address that future? Because you can begin to break it down for them and make it more palatable that we don't have to implement everything at once. Some things are going to take longer. If I'm talking about a 5-year future and my product cycle, life cycle, development life cycle is 5 years, I need to get started now on those new products. But more than likely, you have a shorter life cycle, and so you can take things in bite-sized chunks to work toward that future. But the most important thing is to get people to indoctrinate themselves in that future, get comfortable with it, and lower the risk of adoption of what that future might involve.
Right. So related to that, what would you say usually go right with the clients that you're working with, whether that be public or private entities?
What goes right from a strategic scenario and future planning sort of activity?
The part of creating momentum and actually starting to work towards those goals and strategies. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that often works well is making sure that we do a good job communicating and rationalizing why we want to make that change, because there is resistance to change in any environment. The second thing we're looking for is, what are the burning platforms? What is causing this change, and why do we need to be aware of it, and why do we need to buy into the fact that that change is happening and it's important for us to change? And then once you do that, putting a time frame together to say we have to do two things simultaneously. A lot of organizations talk about being ambidextrous. That doesn't mean just because we're looking at the future that we can ignore or avoid the work today. So you have to be both good and an efficient basis on the products and services that you already have, while you're balancing this idea of creating new products and services and offerings for that future model. So what we look for is the ability and try to introduce the ability to think, I need to be efficient with what I'm doing today and harvest some of those resources and start focusing on what I need to do in the future. So it's moving toward what a lot of other commentators have called this sort of ambidextrous way of working.
Are there any techniques that you use to overcome challenges like resistance in the organizational culture and so on?
Well, we've done a lot of different things. Actually, one of the books that I wrote, a book called Relentless Innovation, deals with the issue of resistance to innovation from a cultural perspective. And in the research we did, we found that, and it won't be surprising to many of your audiences, is that if you if you break an organization down into three components, sort of executive leadership, middle management, and staff, you'll find that the staff deal with problems every day that they would like to overcome. They want to innovate, but often aren't sure how or why. Executives want innovation because they want change and they want more revenue and new products and services. But that leaves the middle management, and they're often the scapegoat for a lot of this. But middle management is tasked with doing the most and getting the most outcome with the least amount of resources, which means they're really focused on efficiency and a lack of variability. So the way to address a lot of cultural barriers is to first impress upon the middle management how they need to be, going back to that idea of being more ambidextrous. How might we introduce more innovation while sustaining as much efficiency as possible? And that's both a top-down and a bottom-up activity, but it also deals with thinking about good communication from the top about why we're doing this work and what's in it for us, and also making sure people see the burning platform. Why is this issue of change so important to us, and what happens if we don't do it? So I'm not trying to paint middle management as a negative. Their operating models and the way they're compensated are really tied to sustaining the operating model of today. And we need, if we're going to change and we're going to get more innovation, you have to change their thinking and get them bought into a new view of the future and their role in that new future.
That's very interesting that you're saying. I also want to explore an article you wrote on LinkedIn in 2017. You called it "What a Decade of Innovation Consulting Has Taught Me," Part 1. And in there, you're saying, or you're challenging the statement that says, everyone can innovate. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think in the past, many organizations have tried to be very inclusive. And I think that that's a fine attitude, but not everyone is good at everything at innovation. For example, if you think about innovation as a journey and the activities across that journey, some activities are more strategic in nature. They're forward-looking, they're more exploratory, they're more about discovery. Other activities are about idea generation. Some other activities are around needing to go deeper into customer research to deeply understand the customer needs. What I like to say is not everybody's good at everything in the journey, but more than likely, everybody can find a place or add value somewhere within the journey. So you need to break it down. When we talk about innovation, we say, well, everybody can innovate. If innovation is that entire journey, then there are very few people that are good all the way across that innovation journey. Even in our team, we have people that are better at research and maybe not so good at taking products to market, or people who are better at strategy and not so good at research. What the point I was trying to get at is it's a very multi-complex problem that very few people can do the entire end-to-end. But finding the people that can do a particular task within the journey effectively is probably what's best. And I don't think many organizations really think through who in my organization is really good at doing this particular task. Instead, they'll gather people and say, okay, this is my innovation team, good luck. So it's both a question of gaining skills through training and also understanding their motivations, what drives them, extrinsic or intrinsic motivation. And then finally, just asking, what's this person good at? They might be good at strategy and not at research. They might be good at research and not generating ideas. So plugging them into the place where they can add the most value is important.
Fantastic. I think that's brilliant food for thought for all of our entrepreneurs out there or corporate entrepreneurs. Thank you so much for that. With that, I think I'll pass the mic back to Stuart Noyes for a few more questions.
Thank you, Dennis. And I must say, Jeffrey, I'm having a great time listening to your answers. This has been a really good session so far, and we haven't even gotten into the part where we get to explore your expertise. So now we're going to kick it into gear, I think. You talk about the front end of strategy and innovation with a focus on trend spotting. So how do you spot trends? I mean, and you actually mentioned one. You talked about digital transformation early on. Let's talk about how do you spot that trend?
Well, it's interesting because I've talked about it in since Dennis brought it up, I've written, I think, a couple of times in my blog posts that the lowest hanging fruit for me from an innovation perspective, I tell this to all my clients. If you want to do the cheapest amount of innovation that drives the most value, there's two areas. One is trend spotting, and the other is prototyping. The reason I say trend spotting is so inexpensive to do is because we as humans are literally awash in trends. Whether you read a magazine, you listen to a newspaper, or you listen to a radio spot, you read a newspaper, you see something on the web, we're constantly being told about trends. They're fashion trends, societal trends, even in our politics. Even immigration is a trend. We're either increasing immigration or decreasing immigration. We're either the dollar is gaining value against other currencies or it's losing value against other currencies. So the fact of the matter is that trends are everywhere. And if we begin to slow down and take advantage of them, to ask ourselves, if we were to take these trends and begin to combine them and assimilate them and ask what kinds of change are they likely to drive, then we'll get a lot more insight about where the future is headed. So the funny thing is that trends are literally everywhere if we will just turn on our filters and start paying attention to them and then begin to ask ourselves, now that I've aggregated a few of these trends, what do they mean in combination? Because pursuing any one trend by itself is pretty risky, but aggregating up a number of trends and asking what impact they may have on the future can be very insightful.
Okay, so we see stuff around us that looks kind of obvious, right? So spotting of trends is kind of, there's, like immigration. Yes, we're talking about it. We see it. It's changing. We can measure it, right? To what extent do you see yourself measuring things that look to be obvious opportunities, and how do you measure them?
Well, you measure both with a trend, what we're interested in is measuring both its potential impact on the future, how long it will live. In other words, some trends are just fads. I used to joke that, everybody had a pet rock at one time for about 6 weeks. That was a really short-lived trend that was actually a fad. Immigration, on the other hand, if we were to talk about that, has been an ongoing source of debate for years. And generally, the U.S. has been a net importer of talent. So over time, that has an impact. It will change the education levels. It will change how we think about things. It will change the dynamics of our culture. It has a lot of impact on our societal way of thinking. So measuring it is interesting, both in terms of how much the trend, how much longevity the trend has, and how much impact it has. But more importantly, if you look at any one trend, how much impact it will have on the future. And from today, that's hard to say because, as an example, we don't know, you can continue to use immigration. We don't know if immigration will continue or not. There's a potential that it could widen and we have more immigration, or that laws could get passed and we have less. So that's also one of the interesting things about trends is almost any of them can be turned on or turned off relatively rapidly. But I suspect that most of them will continue to change slowly. And that's also another reason why we don't notice them as much, because like a few degrees change in temperature, you may not notice it until the temperatures change 7 or 8 degrees, but you didn't notice the first 1 or 2 degrees change in temperature. I don't know if I fully answered your question about measuring it, but I think it's both a measurement of how much impact it's likely to have, how long it will last, and then understanding the change it will bring about in the future we're trying to anticipate.
Yes, I think that's a good answer. What I'm interested in now, let's take it from the macro level and go into the micro and just ask ourselves, when do you know that you have identified an awesome opportunity for a specific client?
Right, that's one of the things that we look for. What happens with a lot of trends and scenario planning is that people write stories about the future, which we'll call scenarios, but they don't necessarily consider the impacts and what we call the implications. So for a business, what you're describing is, let's imagine we've written a story about the future, a scenario. The next thing we want to do is ask ourselves, now what are the implications to your business? And there are going to be positive implications and negative implications. So the positive implications are there's a new emerging set of customers that are just becoming aware of your product or the need for a product that you could offer. And if you spot that set of customers as they emerge and offer them products and services that they need before anyone else recognizes them, you can lock into a nice a market share and a nice niche and perhaps build a wall around it to make it defensible. So there are opportunities in emerging opportunities, emerging customer segments. On the flip side, we may be able to tell a customer, you know what, if you're going into, let's use battery power. If you're going into battery power, a lot of companies and a lot of countries are working on new batteries and new battery technology. And what you're likely to see are what we would call emerging threats, that there are new technologies, new devices, and new companies that are entering this market really rapidly because there's an increasing demand for new battery power. Like we're generating lots of new electricity through lots of solar and wind, but it can't be stored. So we know that a trend in the future is going to be battery life improvement and battery technology improvement. If you're in the battery business today, you can pretty much bet on the fact that there are going to be emerging threats to your business, either from new battery technologies or new battery companies. So both of those insights are valuable to customers. One is, here's an opportunity for me to expand my market position and gain new revenue with new customers. The other is, here's something I need to think about in terms of being defensive or perhaps trying to preclude a new offer from coming into my marketplace, a new battery technology. Or perhaps I see a new emerging technology that instead of letting that come in as a commercial product, I acquire it before it becomes a commercial product so that I offer it as part of my suite of products. Both of those kinds of outcomes are beneficial to our customers.
No, that's excellent. So I think about what you're saying from this this perspective of the client's strategy and long-term strategy, which brings me to my next question. Your most recent book, Outmaneuver, received some very nice reviews on Amazon. Could you give us a quick overview of the book and why you wrote that book?
Sure. Outmaneuver is, I wrote that with a friend of mine who was a military officer. And he knew of my interest in innovation, and he felt that many companies suffer from what we call attrition thinking. So attrition thinking is saying, well, company A has a product, and if I'm company B, I need to put a product out in the market that looks very similar, and the two of us will compete, and I'll try to take share from them, and they'll try to take share from me. But what we end up competing on is price, because the two products look so similar and act so similar that they become commoditized, and there's really not much left to compete on other than price. If I want to drive more revenue or more profitability, I have to take market share from that particular competitor. So attrition is basically wearing down a competitor by offering a very similar product. What we looked at was there's an interesting military phenomenon. Turns out Napoleon and some others used it fairly well. That was called maneuver warfare. And maneuver means moving rapidly and with intent to an undefended or a poorly defended position. And so when you use maneuver, you're using agility and speed and insight. So instead of using the full weight of like an attrition battle, like I'm going to line up all my soldiers against yours and we're going to go head to head, what a maneuver process does is look at how can I be faster and smarter and more nimble than my competitors. And ultimately what you're looking for is one of sort of three competitive positions. You're either looking to preempt someone, meaning I can find the market before you do. I can find a new market niche, a new market customer before you do. I can use what we call dislocation, meaning I can attack your sets of products and services at a point at which you are weak, at which my competitor is weak. So we would find through a set of analyses weaknesses in a competitor's strategy and attack there. And the third one is a distractive scenario in which we try to distract our competitor who may be stronger than us, but we attack them based on areas that we think can distract them from their strategy. a good example is you'll see a lot of this done when, say, groups with very little power use the public microphone to call down a larger company on its trade practices or things like that. So the idea behind around outmaneuver is, how do you use speed and agility and insight and innovation to win, as opposed to just competing on a head-to-head basis, when ultimately competing on that head-to-head basis becomes commoditization.
Okay, so you mentioned speed and agility as the cornerstone of strategy in the next 20 years. Can I assume that it's to some extent coming out of this, your thought or your work on the writing of this book?
Well, we talked about speed and agility. Yes, we also talked about insight and innovation. So let's take each very quickly. Why speed? If you look historically, the pace of change was rather slow. If you look at today and in the future, we can see that people adopt products more quickly. Technology evolves more quickly, and therefore speed is increasing, and the speed and the nature of competition is increasing. So any company that's still operating at the older speeds, when change was slower, is by necessity going to have struggles. So speed is important, and not only operating at the new speed, but operating faster than the new speed, which means we always have to be accelerating and working just a bit faster than whatever speed the current market is working at. And with speed, it's also important to be agile. It's not important just to be fast, because you can be fast but not agile. What we know, based on, if you look at agile methodologies and things, is it's not just about being fast in a straight line, but it's also being able to learn quickly and adapt quickly. So a lot of organizations are struggling with this right now because they're a bit monolithic and not used to having to change very much in a time where speed is increasing and the need for nimbleness and agility is increasing. So that's why we placed emphasis on those two things. And then if you take those two and you say, now I need to innovate as well, because I need to bring new products and new services to market faster, there's your speed, and I need to learn from putting those in the market and adjust, that's agility, then that's how those three characteristics, we believe, work together.
Okay, so one of the things that is really interesting to me is that as I was reading some of the some of the research on your approaches to innovation and the organization that you work for, RTI, their approaches, I was struck by this context of agility and the need to, in a way, be an organization that is nimble, that can move quickly to adapt and to survive. Is this in any way informed by Michael Raynor's strategy paradox? So around 2007, Raynor came out with a book that referenced the success of companies, and companies with very, very strong strategies, very tightly held strategies, were more likely to either succeed wildly or fail utterly. And in many cases, the smarter companies were the ones that maybe held their strategy a little less tightly, and they were more likely to change and to move as necessary. So I was just curious: is this something that was informing your opinion at this point, or is this something that you've come to independently?
Well, I would perhaps suggest a third alternative. I appreciate what I think I'm not familiar with Raynor, but it sounds logical to me. But I think we also operate on the model that I think it was Eisenhower who said, plans are nothing and planning is everything. Meaning, planning and thinking about the future and understanding your different alternatives is vital. But getting locked into a particular plan is deadly. So you need to have a strategy, you need to be thinking forward, but you need to understand that every strategy has alternatives and be cognizant of those alternatives. In fact, one of the things I often talk about from a scenario planning perspective is we jokingly call it practicing the future. So if I'm exercising different scenarios, I'm investigating different outcomes in the future and becoming familiar with them. But that familiarity is vital if one or more of those things emerge. Planning is everything, but getting locked into one plan can be really fatal. And I think that may be what Raynor was saying as well.
Well, he did some original research on it that put some meat behind the comment anyway. Thank you very much for that for the Eisenhower quote. I'm going to remember that one. We've had a nice chance to talk here for a while this morning, and I wanted to ask you before we end, is there anything that we have missed that you would like to share with us?
I think the one thing beyond what we've talked about, I'd like to go back just for a minute and talk about this whole idea of digital transformation and innovation, because I think what it's going to lead us to is a really interesting new future where a lot of products, even products that you might not think need to be smart and connected, are going to be smart and connected. And what that's going to lead us to, ideally, is a new way of interacting with our customers, because now we'll know, whether or not a device in your home is about to fail, whether or not the device in your home needs a new filter or a refill, which means that we can establish a recurring relationship with those devices over time. And we can also harvest data and learn more about usage and what sort of product features are valuable or not valuable. So this whole idea of how this digital transformation and all the data that's going to get generated and the tools we have at our disposal, like machine learning and artificial intelligence, to analyze that data are going to generate new insights. So it's going to be this really interesting recursive working environment where we put products out that are smart, gather data from them, learn new things and create new features for those products, and have new relationships with customers. And I don't want to sound like some sort of future messiah, but I think in the next couple of years, the way we think about product development, the way we think about delivering products to the home, the way that we gather data from those products, everything about that is going to be really interesting and really different. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think we'll see some change in the next, say, 3 to 5 years around this, just because of the power that's coming online to be able to manipulate all the data and to get new insights out of that data.
Well, thank you very much. I'm hoping that insight will add some value in the world as well. Dennis and I'm sure, thank you very much for this time today. Dennis, do you have anything to add to this before we sign off?
Actually, I do have one question. So, Jeffrey, I'm incredibly intrigued by organizational culture and innovation. So I read on your LinkedIn profile that you were part of launching a company simultaneously in different parts of the world. And I guess my final question to you is, how might we foster innovation across organizations that operates in vastly different cultures around the world?
That's a really interesting question, because I've had the good fortune to do innovation work in the U.S. I taught it in Mexico. I taught it in South Africa, in parts of Europe. I've had the good fortune to do some innovation work in the Middle East, as well as in China. And the interesting thing to me is there are differences. And the differences stem from, I think, primarily corporate culture, but also I want to go back even to a more fundamental thing, which is an educational paradox. I think that in countries and places where education is a bit more rote and a bit more structured, that people often don't come out of undergraduate and graduate programs with as much creativity and as much, I'll call it discovery and exploration. In other words, in my experience doing innovation work and training teams around the globe, I found that where education is a bit more free-form and a bit more demanding on the student to take initiative, innovation seems to flourish a little bit more. And in places where the student was expected to learn from a rote perspective, innovation seems a little bit more stymied. And I don't know that that's a core phenomenon, but it's one of my observations that both corporate culture and even down to how people were educated and the educational regime in which they operated in can structure the way they think. So I would think it'd be interesting to even go all the way back into secondary and primary education and ask questions around how are we educating kids to think? Like, how are they taught to think? How expansive are they allowed to be? How creative are they allowed to be in their educational systems? Because those students, kids that are students today, are going to be workers and management in 10 to 15 years' time. And what they learn in school dictates to a certain extent how they think. I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, but I have noticed differences in different geographies. And I would actually attribute it more to societal and educational structures than anything else.
Yeah, this has been an absolutely excellent session, Jeffrey. We really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to hearing more from you and reading some of your books.
Well, guys, I really appreciate the time to talk with you and share some of my experiences. I found it really interesting and valuable as well.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Edison 365 podcast. We certainly enjoyed the conversation and hope that you're left with more knowledge of the innovation space. We have more exciting guests coming up, so make sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your network. Also, if there's anyone you'd like for us to interview next, make sure to leave that in a comment or send us an email to the email address in the description. Thanks again to our guest, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.